Today, myself, Hannah, Keely, Abby and Emily are going to deliver a short presentation about HS2. We're going to interpret the project requirements, point out appropriate legal frameworks, the impact upon corporate social responsibilities and governance requirements. Abby will now take us through the agenda.
So today, first of all, Emily's going to be introducing the project. Hannah will then discuss the project requirements that we'll be referring to throughout. Keely's going to take us through corporate social responsibility. I myself will then take us through the governance frameworks. Hannah will then be discussing some of the legal frameworks, and then Emily will go into a little bit more depth with these using specific examples before we then close the presentation out.
HS2 is a state-of-the-art high-speed train line critical for the UK's low-carbon transport future. It will connect London and the Midlands, the North and Scotland. It will also run through 8 of the UK's largest cities. The delivery of HS2 is split into 3 phases: Phase 1, Phase 2A and Phase 2B. The links to the North and South brings communities together. HS2 also aims to reduce the carbon emissions of the UK transport sector. There are 3 main benefits defined by the HS2 programme, the first one being capacity, providing the very needed extra rail capacity. Integrating rail projects in the North and the Midlands, HS2 will create existing space on existing railway for more local trains and freight trains, creating more local train links throughout the communities. The second being connectivity. HS2 will connect the South and the North with 25 stations, 8 being in Britain's largest cities. In preparation for HS2, cities are planning on growth and investments based on the arrival of HS2. This means more jobs are being created and businesses being set up. Carbon will be the third, being carbon. HS2 will be sustainable, climate resilient, and help cut the UK's carbon emissions. The journey will be low carbon, the stations will be energy efficient, and the carbon footprint will be over a 120-year period will emit less carbon than the UK road network does in a month. Next slide, please.
So, as Emily's mentioned, HS2 set out some rather ambitious claims about the success of their project, its sustainability and environmental impacts. According to their website, they aim to provide a travel option which is 17 times more carbon efficient than a domestic flight and 7 times more carbon efficient than an average car journey. In order to do this, they came up with some strategic aims for their project. The full list is on the slide. However, there are some strong themes to these objectives. Economic growth is an important one. They want to bring about jobs for people, foster skills, and bring value for money, which is in turn going to make them a catalyst for economic growth. They plan to offer 30,000 jobs at peak construction, and 2,000 of those will be apprentices. Being a good neighbour to the local community and environment as an organisation is another. They are planning to deliver on a goal of 7 million shrubs being planted alongside the railway, which links to their strategic objective of being a good neighbour. All of these strategic aims of the project require strict governance to deliver on the intended benefits and corporate social responsibilities of the organisation. Next slide, please.
So, what is corporate social responsibility? So the term CSR refers to practices and policies undertaken by businesses that are intended to have a positive influence on the world. This includes producing a product whilst delivering value for money and considering social and ethical needs of stakeholders in the community. So corporate social responsibility has 3 elements which make up the construct of CSR. These include economic responsibility, ecological responsibility, and social responsibility. So often businesses engage in these elements in one way or another, for example, the use of reports and public announcements. It's also very closely linked to stakeholder engagement as it considers stakeholder interests and power to determine suitable communication to create this positive influence. So there are 4 elements of CSR, and similarly to Maslow's hierarchy, a pyramid of responsibility has been created to represent the elements of CSR. So the first required responsibility is an economic one, and this details a business's goal of being profitable, as no business sets out with the goal of making a loss, as it would not be sustainable. The next required responsibility is the legal side. This is required as companies have an obligation to obey the law, for example, health and safety and employment laws. Without doing so, a business could face lawsuits and in result could be forced to close. The third step is the ethical component, and this is an expected quality, but not a required one. This expects a company will make ethical decisions and make morally guided decisions to do the right thing, whether this be for the employee or the community. The final element of the hierarchy is the charitable element, and this is expecting a business to behave in a philanthropic way, which is about perhaps doing community work or something which can give back to the environment. So as can be seen on the slide, there are a number of influences on CSR. Some of them we have touched on, and others include stuff like politics, competitors, and public perception. Taking part in CSR policies and expectations produce a number of benefits, such as those which can be seen on the screen, for example, integrity and successful relationships. So what is economic responsibility? This is the ability for a business to earn a profit whilst providing value for money. Profit is typically not maximised as it's reinvested back into the staff. So this can be seen as a short-term loss, but in the long-term perspective, it provides a better financial gain. For example, HS2 set up a wellbeing initiative to introduce wellbeing champions and resilience. Reinvesting back into the staff is more likely to improve motivation and morale, and this encourages people to associate with the business. The HS2 have also outlined strategic goals and legal frameworks which govern behaviour and decision making. On the right, we have an image which presents some of these decisions, which Emily will talk us through in more depth later. So this goes to show the project outcomes and positive relationships with the community enables the business to succeed whilst reinvesting back into staff, back into the community, and still able to make a profit. And this demonstrates the economic responsibility. So what is ecological responsibility? This is about promoting the growth of the business whilst contributing to the regeneration of the environment. Legal frameworks influence this as they set out safe and sustainable practices. For example, HS2 have used funds to protect the wildlife and encourage the use of cycling to reduce carbon emissions. Again, this is something Emily will cover in more detail in some further slides. Creating an ecological approach improves companies' reputation and can actually prevent boycotts or petitions if a business demonstrates good values to do their part to show support into the community and the environment. And by following this, it creates a win-win approach. And this is what's known as being a good citizen whilst making the business more profitable. The final element, as discussed earlier, is social responsibility. So this is the ability to maximise stakeholder values whilst also contributing to society. So again, it's about making a profit, but morally doing the right thing to support the business, the staff and communities. Therefore, profit maximisation should not be the sole goal, but their values and legal frameworks should encourage a positive and ethically social responsibility. So there are 4 attributes which consist in social responsibility, as can be seen in the 4 bullet points at the bottom. And HS2 have met these attributes by carrying out a blind audition recruitment process, which involves taking personal characteristics away from forms for the interview process, and have in fact received a recognised status as a result of their inclusive workforce and following social guidelines that are expected to look after staff and also look after the environment.
So ultimately, governance allows you to know who is responsible for what to allow for accountability to take place. So governance is there to provide confidence to the board of directors and trustees that the investments being made into the project portfolio or programme is actually being well managed. So in most projects, a governance board or steering group, as it's more commonly known, will be the ones who make the decisions throughout the project lifecycle in terms of governing the project, deciding who's responsible for what, as well as the standard working practices you can expect from the project. So as all projects are unique, they require different things. However, there are 4 main roles are needed to establish, direct, implement and validate project governance. So the sponsor acts as a project oversight. The steering committee and the project management office act in managing and assessing issues, risks, and keeping an eye on the project timeline. And then there's the project manager who executes the things outlined by the previous roles. So when governance is working well, it can act as a reporting tool to allow it to be easily seen what progress is being made against the strategic objectives set out. So governance provides parameters for different aspects of a project to exist inside, ensuring the project stays on track and with those defined limits, whether that be in terms of health and safety or economic limits. So as you can see by the slide, the reason 5 and 8 projects fail is due to poor governance, highlighting just how important it is to get it right. So there are 8 general aspects of governance that contribute to a successful project. And as I've previously mentioned, each project being unique, these components need to be considered and tailored to the project in question. So those 8 components are the governance model being used, who's accountable and responsible, the levels of stakeholder engagement needed, stakeholder communication, how meetings take place and how it gets reported back to those stakeholders, how risk and issue management takes place, assurance, and then finally the 8th point is the project management control process. Next slide, please. So as you can imagine, HS2 is a long and complex project, meaning that the governance frameworks involved are crucial to project success and need to be flexible and strong to withstand the test of time and ensure that they fit to each phase of construction. So with the project spanning almost 30 years, there are different things that will take priorities at different times. So creating a governance framework has been really difficult for HS2, with them struggling to find what to put the focus on, wanting to create a document that focuses on the benefits realised at the end of the project, but not wanting to make it inflexible so it struggles to keep control over the 30-year timescale. So as detailed in the slide, the Department for Transport and HS2 Limited as a company both have parts to play in HS2's governance framework, with the Department for Transport being responsible for the overall management of the project and HS2 being responsible for the actual delivery of the product. A small selection of the other responsibilities are detailed on the slide for you to just have a quick look over. So the governance of HS2 is maintained through the preparation of reports to the Programme Board, Projects Board and working groups through the life of the programme to enable progress risks, issues and changes to be managed and decisions to be taken. So regular bilaterals are held between the Department for Transport and HS2 Limited to discuss progress against those issues. So in order for HS2's governance frameworks to remain relevant through that 30-year timescale, it has been based around their business case, with the business case acting as a point of reference for all aspects of their governance. So the HS2 project will be considered a successful project if the economic benefits envisaged are delivered and the costs of doing so have been controlled throughout. So while HS2 is unique in its size and complexity, it's not unique in the elements defining success, and as such, lessons have been learned from other large-scale projects. So one similar project that experienced some of the challenges that HS2 have experienced is the West Coast Main Line upgrade, which had an original budget of £2.5 billion in 1998, which increased to £14.5 billion by May of 2002. So the Strategic Rail Authority was asked to take control and alongside Network Rail turned the project around and delivered it at a lower cost than the latter forecast. Their business case played a critical part in that turnaround, hence why HS2 have based their governance frameworks around their business case too. So of course, governance goes beyond just being a framework. It's the people that deliver the projects and the people at all levels that make it a success. So the Government Service Design Manual recognises this, and within its governance principles for agile service delivery. So people will of course come and go throughout the project's life cycle, as at different phases, different skill sets are going to be needed. But if the correct governance frameworks are in place initially, then this shouldn't cause any risk to the project's vision to meet its strategic goals overall. Next slide, please.
So, as Keely mentioned, an important part of corporate social responsibility is the legal aspect. And this is where legal frameworks come in. Legal frameworks are made up of all legislation, regulations, and policies which the project works to. As you can see on the slide, legislation is defined as the rules or laws relating to a particular activity that are made by a government. Legislation can be primary or secondary, primary being an act made by Parliament and secondary being an act created by ministers who work under an Act of Parliament. Secondary legislation is particularly important to HS2 as a lot of the legislation they work to is secondary legislation, particularly statutory instruments. Secondary instruments, are detailed policies which work under an act to fill in the gaps which the acts don't follow. The overarching act which HS2 works to is the High Speed Rail London to West Midlands Act 2017. HS2 has a range of policies and procedures in place under this which provide highly governed and ethical projects to work to. Compulsory purchase of land is an example of this. However, the organisation has its own policies to ensure that acquisitions are carried out in an appropriate manner which links back to their strategic objective of being a good neighbour. Next slide, please.
The first legislation that we'll be going through is the Climate Change Act 2008. The Climate Change Act sets legally binding targets to reduce carbon dioxide emissions in the UK by at least 80% by 2050. The government releases guidelines every 5 years that businesses should follow in order to help towards the reduction of carbon emissions. HS2 will be one of the world's most sustainable railway lines, helping support the UK in reducing the carbon emissions in the transport sector. Some of the considerations HS2 are taking in reducing the UK's carbon emissions are considering low carbon options in developing the scheme, reducing embedded carbon in construction materials and carbon emissions from construction works, use or generating low carbon energy. HS2 will reduce their carbon footprint. As there are more local services available, people will be able to make the shift from road to rail, cutting their carbon footprint. This will help reduce the emissions from road transport, reduce congestion, and improve the quality of air. High-speed rail lines can also reduce the aviation transport on the same routes by as much as 80%. In order for people to make the shift from plane to train, rail journeys must be faster, frequent, and more reliable, which are all qualities of HS2. Next slide, please. As HS2 will have a lower carbon emission, it offers a greener way to travel, protecting the local environment. Looking after the local environment is one of HS2's strategic aims. HS2 are keen to protect the environment, therefore they have set up the Green Corridor. The Green Corridor will run alongside the lines, creating climate-resilient habitats and new outdoor spaces for people to enjoy. Planting new trees and creating new habitats will encourage the wildlife to adapt to the climate change, sustaining the environment for the future. The Green Corridor will also help sustain and protect the UK's biodiversity. The Green Corridor creates new habitats for species to live and move about landscapes, making them less vulnerable. Furthermore, the Green Corridor will create public spaces for people to enjoy, improving mental well-being and community cohesiveness. Next slide, please. With climate change and HS2 governance, HS2 will select innovative and sustainable suppliers. As part of assessing their suppliers, HS2 considers their impact and contribution to the local environment and communities, while also considering the sustainability and innovation. HS2 will employ sustainable and innovative suppliers to ensure the protection of the environment is kept as one of their main visions. 96% of HS2 suppliers are UK-based, cutting the effect of transporting materials from one country to another, therefore reducing their carbon emissions. As protecting the environment is one of HS2's strategic aims, HS2 are responsible for keeping up to date with the government guidelines. It is essential that all employees are aware of the steps they can make in reducing carbon footprints. For example, the HS2 designers have made a 27% reduction in structural steel for the roof of the station. This creates a 2,700 tonne reduction in carbon. Next slide, please. The next legislative acts I will be going through is the Control of Noise at Work Regulations 2005 and the Control of Pollution Act 1974. The Control of Noise at Work Regulations 2005 require employees to prevent or reduce risks to health and safety. The Control of Pollution Act 1974 gives local authorities powers to control the noise and vibration from construction sites. The aim of the noise regulation is to ensure that workers' hearing is protected from excessive noise at their place of work, which could cause them to lose their hearing. The Control of Pollution Act allows authorities to set out its requirements prior to the construction starting. By law, it is essential that all measures are put into place to protect workers' hearing. Next slide, please. With regulation of noise and HS2 corporate social responsibility, HS2 have partnered up with high-tech, smart tech company Eve. Eve's solution uses a digitally enabled headset that both protects hearing and gathers noise data. The data is transferred to a unique noise mapping software and analysed to produce accurate information about every worker's noise exposure across the worksite. The headsets can also allow for the workers to hear through them, meaning they can wear their ear protection all throughout their working day. This technology can also be used to monitor the noise level throughout the site. In terms of the community, HS2 have offered a noise insulation and rehousing project. HS2 offers noise insulation packages and rehousing packages that are set out in the community engagement framework. It also allows for any residential properties to protect their buildings and residents from the noise created by the project. The noise insulation packages offer secondary glazing for living rooms, bedrooms, and extra ventilation. The rehousing package offers temporary or alternative accommodation, insurance, and pet accommodation. Next slide, please. In terms of regulation of noise and HS2 governance follow the best practicable means set out in the Control of Pollution Act 1974. The nominated individual will ensure that all contractors consider the noise levels of the equipment used, the location of the equipment, and the control of working hours. In the Code of Construction for HS2, it states that noise and vibration will be controlled by the management and monitoring during construction. The contractors will create a noise and vibration management plan that will consider the impacts on relevant ecological areas, installation of noise insulation, preparation of risk assessments, development of noise and monitoring protocol, and implementation of the management plans. It is also important that HS2 consider the noise level triggers at certain times during the day. It is shown in the Code of Construct that during the hours of 7 AM to 7 PM, the noise trigger level is set to 70 to 75 decibels, and then decreases from the hours to 7 PM to 10 PM at 65 decibels. And for any time after 10 PM, the noise trigger level is 55 decibels. Next slide, please.
So how does HS2 legal frameworks impact upon corporate social responsibilities and governance requirements? So HS2 policies encourage and motivate the company to behave in an ethical manner and positively contribute towards the environment and society, encompassing what is set out by their corporate social requirements. And then finally, HS2 legal frameworks ensure governance has a standard of responsibility and accountability when it comes to the parameters in which the project operates, ensuring the strategic goals are met. The next few slides will just detail our reference list, which we have used to support and produce our presentation. Thank you for listening.